Hi. With the passing recently of the former South African president, F.W. de Klerk, who was the last apartheid leader, or rather the last president during that apartheid era, South Africa's been very much on my mind and the events of that time. I've watched the two excellent films, Invictus with Morgan Freeman and Long Walk to Freedom with Idris Elba. Both respectively playing Nelson Mandela. Now, I've always found Mandela a fascinating figure, and I think he largely deserves the praise he gets. It's very, very difficult not to be inspired by a man who, I mean, difficult if you've got conviction on issues like human rights. It's hard not to be inspired by a man who spent 27 years in jail, many of those years in very tough conditions, um, and then went on to be the leader of a great nation, and to do that in such a way that he forgave his opponents, he promoted reconciliation. It is truly remarkable. Um, of course, jointly with F.W. de Klerk, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993, well deserved in my view. There's many contradictions though about Nelson Mandela. He was not a pacifist. There's a difference between Mandela and figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Mandela was not a pacifist. He started off that way with non-violent struggle, but then he felt that it wasn't going anywhere. That's somewhat understandable because it wasn't in that context. So it is understandable why the ANC took a more militant approach. I get that. Um, Of course, it has to be recognised that there were figures against apartheid, white South Africans, prominent figures like Helen Suzman. Um, so much like the American civil rights struggle, it wasn't black versus white, it wasn't that simple. But it was a segregated system. Now, what I want to talk about is what I feel Mandela got wrong. There's been plenty said about what a great man he was, and that's there. But I've always believed that with iconic figures, there has to be balance. There has to be an honest perspective. I've done this with Muhammad Ali, you know. So in the case of Mandela, I think the big thing that he got wrong was a lack of consistency on the issue of human rights. I mean, if we look at Mandela, this was a man who joined the non-violent struggle, who then went to violence, who was imprisoned for years, who was released, prevented civil war in South Africa with his leadership, who promoted reconciliation, and who, very, very importantly, stepped down voluntarily after 5 years. That's a rare thing in African politics. So, it often takes away from the fact that Mandela is a towering figure of the 20th century. But I do find that one aspect of his legacy doesn't sit well with me, and that is his coziness with dictators. An example of this is Fidel Castro. Mandela was very happy to, be associated with him, and this wasn't just diplomacy. Like as president of South Africa, he met various leaders. This was an affinity. You know, Mandela was sympathetic to the likes of Fidel Castro and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, both men who presided over brutal regimes. Um, of course, he'll have their apologists and liars who want to deny that, but the fact of the matter is, Castro was a communist dictator. Gaddafi was also a dictator, Pan-Africanist in the Pan-Africanist model. I do think Mandela was reluctant to criticize Pan-Africanists. He criticized Mugabe, but quite late for Mugabe's excesses. He was reluctant to criticize African dictators, although he was very quick to condemn George Bush and Tony Blair. Um, this is what Mandela got wrong. I mean, for a figure who's so associated with human rights and liberation, he done next to nothing to, condemn their excesses. And I think this is a classic case of ideological bias blinding judgment. I think Mandela, saw them as having an ideological affinity because they were pan-socialists, because they were pan-Africanists. And so either it wasn't politically convenient for him because it would have been unpopular with the ANC, or he just didn't have the willpower. Or maybe Mandela wasn't that consistent on human rights. That's the reality. Um, none of this will be popular to say because it's almost like when you get someone like that who's so lionized and um, so idealized, any dissenting view is, immediately shouted down. It's like this with Muhammad Ali in the world of boxing. But Muhammad Ali had many contradictions and flaws. Muhammad Ali was pro-segregation. Um, the great thing about Mandela was that he fought a racist system, but he was also, went out of his way to promote reconciliation. So I just think it's unfortunate that he wasn't entirely consistent on human rights issues. And I think, great figure as he was, he would have been even greater had he been so. I mean, Bono of U2 fame once called Mandela the president of the world. That might be a bit of hyperbole, but there's not many figures that are, you know, that lionized beyond their own country. But imagine had Nelson Mandela really, really been consistent and called out like to Fidel Castro on his human rights abuses, then I think Mandela's statue would be absolutely massive. Um, it's already pretty big, but he's not without his critics, and some of the criticism is deserved. And I think we make a mistake of lionizing someone to such an extent that they, are above reproach. I think that's a mistake. I do not like personality cults, never have. Um, Looking at South Africa now, 8 years after Mandela's death, 20 years after his presidency, it's in a bad way. Crime is out of control. The violence this year is the worst seen since apartheid. Um, Many white South Africans are genuinely uncertain about the future. Is this the rainbow nation that Mandela envisaged? Now, to be fair, I don't think it would be fair to say that's his legacy because there have been about 3 or 4 presidents since him, and they all are culpable for the current situation of South Africa. But perhaps there was a little bit of naivety around Mandela's legacy that everything would be good from then on, and that obviously hasn't been the case. Um, if Mandela were still alive, well, if he was, he'd be 103. But if he were a leader today, I wonder what his stances would be on issues like the Arab Spring. It's known that he was very critical of Blair and Bush over Iraq, which many people were. But was that because he was anti-war, or was it because he was an apologist for Saddam? That's a question. Um, so I think it's valid to discuss these things. There's a video with Mandela and Castro online. It's an echo chamber. I did leave views like this, and no doubt they'll be denounced. Um, but no historic figure is above reproach, including someone as revered as Nelson Mandela. He didn't get everything right. As a man, he was not a great husband. Um, but that's, you have to allow for the fact he was in prison for a lot of the time. He could be very stubborn by his own admission. Um, and for me, the biggest flaw with his legacy is the fact he was so cozy with the likes of those dictators. I suppose someone might argue, well, he also met British prime ministers and American presidents, and he got on well with them. I mean, he was an Anglophile. He got on well with the Queen. Um, so maybe Mandela transcended politics. I don't know, but I think in the case of Castro and Gaddafi, there was an affinity there that went beyond just being diplomatic. Anyway, that's my take. One more thing. Some would say he didn't do enough to combat AIDS, which, had a chronic mortality in South Africa. Again, maybe he done too little, too late on that. It's easy to forget he was an old man as president. He was in his 70s. And it may well be that, he stepped down from sheer fatigue over democratic principles, but I think it's probably a bit of both. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. It's something to think about when his legacy is assessed.